Hello and welcome to today's CE Pro webinar entitled Powering Up Your Profits as an Energy Expert. My name is Jason Knott, editor of CE Pro, and I am excited to be moderating today's event. We all know clean, reliable power is not only a key element to maintain the effectiveness of low voltage electronics, but the entire infrastructure of the home. The entertainment systems, the security systems, the networking, the communications, all rely on efficient power, as do the HVAC mechanical systems, smart appliances, and of course, the hot new category that integrators are getting engaged in, lighting fixtures. So the timing couldn't be any more perfect for integrators to be thinking about becoming energy experts and that go-to energy contractor for their customers, whether it be just providing quality power, but also energy storage and battery power. So from a backup standpoint. So the big question, the big but is, how do you sell this? How do you approach your customers? How do you converse with them about it? What's the difference between offering some sort of an isolated inline surge suppression system or power conditioner and an entire energy management hub for your customer? And then how can that type of product also help you be more efficient as an integrator? So those are all some of the things that we are going to talk about today. And I want to thank the sponsor of today's event, Rosewater Energy Group, for stepping up so we can bring you these educational events. So before we get into the meat and potatoes, I've got a couple of quick housekeeping items. This video and audio is being streamed over the internet, so hopefully you're hearing and seeing me. Check your sound levels. Make sure you're unmuted. If you're having a problem there, there's a question mark that's in the audio selection that you can hit in the corner of the Global Meet interface that says "Test my system," and that might kind of give you a sense if you're not hearing me clearly. Sometimes just disconnecting and rejoining will solve the problem. So if you're still having problems, please check on that. Next, this is an interactive event. So we do have a panel of experts with me today, but we want to hear from you. So on the left side of your screen, there's a box that says ask a question where you can enter questions. I encourage you, enter the questions as you think of them. We are going to save time at the end, and we're probably going to look at these questions throughout, and if there's some really good ones come in, we'll answer them as they happen. But answer them as soon as, or ask them as soon as you think of them. Don't wait till the end. Now, also, that same Q&A section will be used for technical questions. So if you're having trouble with the technical elements of the webcast, we do have our staff who's monitoring that, and they will be able to help you. So, okay. So let me introduce today's panel. So with me today, a man who needs no introduction, long time, obviously, icon of the industry, if I can use that term not loosely, Joe Piccirilli, CEO and Managing Director of Rosewater Energy. Hi, Joe. Thanks for joining me.
Hi, Jason. I've been called lots of things, but icon works. I like that. I'm going to try and fit into that one because most of the names people call me are not that nice. I'm really happy to be here.
Well, it's well deserved. Also with me is David Lakin, Vice President of Sales at Rosewater Energy. Hi, David.
Hi, Jason. Thank you for having me on this program with you.
Yep, thanks for joining me today. Now, also with us is Lamar Gibson, President of Maestro Home Integration in Memphis, Tennessee. Hi, Lamar.
Hello, how are you guys?
We're great. Thanks for joining us today. And then last but not least, Mark Ayub, Energy Division Director of CET and Associates in Denver. Hi, Mark.
Hi, Jason, and hello, everyone.
All right. So just to kind of give you a sense of what we're going to talk about today, I mentioned, this isn't really going to be a technology webinar. We are really going to be talking about sales and profit. That was what we talked about, powering up your profits as an energy expert. So we're going to really focus on how to sell energy management. And when I talk about that, we're going to really break down that sales conversation into multiple categories. We're going to talk about the how you converse with the customer about the causes, both internal and external, of power problems. When in the sales conversation you should be discussing or bringing up either the technical aspects of energy, an energy hub and energy power problems, or what a generator might do and how a generator works into this conversation. We're also going to be talking about, from the sales standpoint, how you talk to them about the sensitivity of the expensive electronics in the home. And then also from the sales standpoint, we're going to talk about, I mentioned the energy property, but energy element, but also how you can help them determine what their power plan, quote unquote, is for their home. Next, we're going to be talking about digging into some of the misconceptions that customers have about energy management. And then we're going to get into forming partnerships with electricians, which I know is on the mind of a lot of integrators because they're running into this same situation right now on the lighting fixture side, as well as, how these energy management systems can benefit the integrator from an efficiency standpoint and a service standpoint. So that'll give you kind of a quick sense of the agenda today. Again, it's going to be a free-flowing conversation, and we want you to ask those questions as they come in. All right. One other quick thing I wanted to throw out here before we really dig into the nuts and bolts. This is some CE Pro data that we put together that we asked integrators, what percentage of you are working in either surge suppression, power conditioning, or power quality spaces or area? So it came out as 72% of integrators are working in this space. Now, I'm going to suspect that most of that 72% are individual integrators who are putting in surge suppression devices or power conditioning, but maybe not necessarily have elevated to the sense where they're doing a full energy management hub. And let me just kind of bounce that off of you, Joe. When you look at the data like this, is that your sense also that the majority of these guys who are saying they're engaged in this space are really just at that surge suppression and maybe power conditioning level, but not the full energy management hub level yet?
Yes, it's exactly what I think. In past, what we've seen over the last decade or so, we've seen these rack level devices where, it goes into the audio rack or the video rack and things plug into the back of the device. Some of those devices are for power conditioning, other are for surge suppression. So they are really not a complete solution. There's no single device that does it all. And they really only work at the device level instead of working at the panel level, because as you mentioned in the introduction, now so many systems in the house are dependent on high quality, uninterrupted power that at the rack level, you're just not doing enough. It's not close. And so I would agree. A lot of this is just rack level. And I sometimes tongue in cheek go, a lot of those things are sort of the last things mentioned in a sale. They're sort of, oh, by the way, you should have this. And, the old accounting principle, LIFO, last in, first out. So it is also a place where the client goes, if I've got to save some money, I'm going to get rid of that. And people leave it alone. They don't really discuss the importance of it. So that's why I think that number looks like that. Yeah,
I would agree. All right, let's dig into, you mentioned rack level versus what we're talking about when we discuss an energy management hub. And I love this photo on the right that shows you and Jim Sanfemio standing next to the Rosewater Energy Management Hub, because it really gives everybody a sense of what we're talking about and the size of what we're talking about. But just to give everybody in a nutshell, when we're talking about energy management hub, what are we talking about?
All right, I have to start out with just a little bit of history and why this product ends up being the behemoth, the big monolith that it is. About 12 years ago, I was starting to do some research because I had noticed a tremendous amount of client dissatisfaction with home automation, early lighting control, all of these things. And, they're wonderful devices. And I started to notice that clients were unhappy. And being an engineer by education, I started taking things apart and checking to see how they were built. And for the most part, all of the equipment we were putting in was very robust. And again, looking at installations, I'm going, again, for the most part, the installations were quite good. So what was the problem? And the problem, as it turned out, was just energy, sags, surges, because the quality of energy being produced in North America, at no fault of any particular service, was diminishing. Houses are getting bigger, infrastructure is getting older. So I decided that, well, wait, why don't I begin to look at a device that worked at the panel level, so whole house, or a large portion of all the critical systems, and did more than just power conditioning or just suppress surges. I wanted to have a complete device that would take up large-scale battery backup, would provide extraordinary power conditioning, would protect against surges and snags. And because I live in South Florida, where lightning is a real issue, I wanted something that also included the same sort of lightning protection that the military or broadbands and telcos use at their head end. And what you're seeing pictured is that device. And there is no way to do it in a small box, but that is the most complete energy solution available. It encompasses everything we've just talked about, but in one component.
So does this need to be placed in a climate controlled environment, or is it generate heat? Give us a little bit of sense there.
It generates some heat, but not a lot. What we ask for is that we have moving air and that it be sheltered from the elements. So a garage, a mechanical room. It does not need to be a conditioned space. I mean, we have one sitting in Scottsdale in a warehouse with no air conditioning, and it works fine in the dead of summer. But as long as we have moving air, we're good. Now, the device is 84 inches tall. It is about 2.5 feet by 1.5 feet in footprint and weighs 2,400 pounds. So it is quite the device in terms of space requirements.
Well, it's certainly impressive. Good for that. Thank you for giving us that overview. All right, let's dig into the sales element. We've already kind of talked a little bit about that, but I want to kind of, as I said, kind of break this conversation into various elements of when you're talking with a customer about this. So Lamar, I'm going to start with you on this one. So, there are so many different causes of power problems. Joe just mentioned some of them are internally driven, some of them are external. How does that conversation go in terms of, is this a worthwhile conversation for an integrator who right now is, listening to this webcast and is an area where they don't have thunderstorms and they don't really have a lot of wind and they don't have hurricanes? Is that only and they don't have ice storms? Is it isolated only to that kind of external conversation, or how do you bring it up?
Well, thanks, Jason. First, I'd like to know where those places are, because I think I'd like to move. Because everywhere has problems. If it's not natural, then it's man-made. And we started about a year ago with Joe and David's help, planting the seed much earlier than the client conversation itself. So we took literature that was provided by Rosewater, and we sent it to the architect firms that we regularly work with. We sent it to the premier builders in town, and we told them in advance that we're going to be having these conversations with their clients, and we wanted them to be comfortable with it. And what we're finding is that approach is allowing us to have at least a deeper conversation. Sometimes we don't always make it past the price tag, but we're at least getting the builder and the architect to consider foundational support for this during the new construction, so it can be added at a later date. So it could be as simple as talking with the
I think he froze. Did he freeze on everybody else, or is it just me?
No, he froze.
He froze. All right, Lamar froze. Hopefully he'll be able to link back in. But actually, let me turn to you, David. I know you're talking to integrators every single day. We had this massive ice storm down in Texas a few years ago. Is this the sort of thing that after we have rolling? Oh, are you back, Lamar?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yeah, you broke up there. So I'll come back to you. I was just going to ask David, kind of pivoting to ask David a question here. After we have some of these areas where there might be rolling blackouts or thunderstorms or ice storms, is that the perfect time to really talk to a customer and bring up this conversation about an energy management hub after we've had those natural occurrences?
Well, it is, but I think it also should be brought up when we're not having those, right? I mean, the challenge is always when you play upon disasters, right? That's always a challenge. People are much more aware of it, but the reality is that the media is also bringing this into our attention today on a regular basis, that we are having challenges with the grid and we are having challenges with power that's out there. And so our clients are much more aware of it. They're aware of the things where the lights pulse, or they have little micro drops, or like we are now, they're on a Zoom call or a webinar and they just drop for no reason at all. And these are all things that they're aware of. So by bringing these up early and into the conversation, we mentioned it earlier, what's your power plan? This is a great way to get that conversation started, get them thinking about it, that this is something that we need to do, because with all the things that we offer, the foundation that it all sits on is the power inside the building, in that home. And this is what allows us to provide them the best experience possible with the products that we provide and give it the longevity. So natural disasters are absolutely something that we want to look at, but there's all these other little events that we want to acknowledge as well, because those natural events happen sporadically. But the power issues are happening on a regular basis as we go along in our day-to-day life.
Yeah, and to that point, I want to move on to this next slide. And I kind of just pulled together a little bit of terminology here, so to speak, of different types of power problems that do occur. Sags versus swells, transients and noise. We have blackouts, obviously impulses and oscillatory transients, and all the various causes that can happen. And again, internal versus external. And so, Mark, let me ask you. So, do you get this level of detail with a customer? Do you talk about the types of power problems individually, or is that just going to glaze their eyes over completely? Or and then do you talk about internal versus external?
If we're talking about the client, the end user, usually they will glaze over when you start bringing this sort of stuff up. I think the dealer and the contractor understand it much better. But I think a bigger point here is we're talking about this like it's some kind of new thing. Batteries are fairly new in our space, but every single one of my customers over the last 20 years in one way or another has had a generator, whether a small one or a big one. So they were already aware of power quality issues, or at least loss of power, such that they thought it was important enough to bring in a semi-trailer size generator in the first place. And what we're really trying to tell them is that we're able to provide you with the backup power utilizing something cleaner and quieter and safer, and bringing it into the integrator space. Up until recently, integrators didn't have any play here, and now we're actually approaching the point where arguably the most important trade in the house for these customers is the integrator. And now we've got the opportunity to actually present that to them. And just to touch on the internal external thing, I think I'm going to use a bit of experience here. Years ago, if anybody's ever wired up CrestNet back in the day, you know that if you underpowered a keypad or a touch panel, you had all sorts of weird issues with your Crestron, and you really couldn't diagnose it and couldn't figure it out because they were intermittent, they were odd. That was a power problem, and it didn't get solved until you powered your equipment properly and consistently.
Jason, it's
Yes.
Joe.
Yep, go Joe.
A couple things, because Mark was right on. If you start talking about some of these things to end users, they'll be lost in them before you get 3 words out. But I think it's also important, because you keep mentioning internal and external. One of the things that we should point out and people recognize, houses today are either getting bigger on the same piece of property, or there's a lot going on in vertical living, and particularly in desirable places in the United States. So you have population density shifting and increasing in many places, but nobody can build a power plant. Power plants take 30 years. I've lived in Florida since 1974. The population in Florida in 1974 was under 8 million. We're at 23 million. And there hasn't been a power plant built in any year since I've lived here. So, and Florida is like many coastal areas, what used to be a 1,200 square foot winter cottage is now a 25,000 square foot permanent residence, in the same space with the same power feeding it. So all of the things we have on this, the segs, the surge, the swells, all of those things occur on a much more frequent basis because you have a great deal more demand from the same grid and the same supply. And so that's a problem that exists outside of the house, but a problem people don't think about. And then we have this huge push towards renewables. And renewables, by their very nature, are intermittent. You have lots of demand with intermittent supply or unpredictable supply, power quality goes down. So it really is a combination of factors that creates everything on this slide, allows it to happen far more frequently than it happened in the past. And I think almost everybody on this phone call will remember the days when we had 3/4-inch VCRs in our house, and the consequence of a power problem was the timer blinked. Well, today the consequence of that power problem is you can't turn on your lights, and that becomes a very serious issue to clients. So I think talking about it in those terms that people can look around and see, yep, that's what's going on here, becomes a little easier rather than being super technical, from my point of view.
Yeah, Lamar, let me go back to you. You froze there, and then I ended up by probably cutting you off. You probably were still talking when I started interjecting, but you were explaining your experience that you've had in terms of moving into this category. Did you want to go back to that?
Hey, absolutely. And we've got some local internet work being done in the neighborhood. So I apologize for that. So in planting the seed early on with the architect builders, that's allowing us to have the conversation before the client ever comes to our door, right? Because they're planning the foundational, they're planning the physical footprint of it, and they actually understand the importance. Doesn't mean that they're always going to bite off on it initially, because a new home is a big expense. But it allows us to come back 6 months or 6 years even and place that hardware, that the Rosewater facility at that property. And the moment the client comes in and we start talking about technology, it's the first conversation that we have now. So it isn't the last. It isn't what we say, hey, and by the way, we think you should get this. We are asking the question, what is your power plan? In the event that this happens, or with all of your wants, needs, and desires, what happens if there's a hiccup with that? And so it allows us to really have a good, candid conversation with the customer about power very early on.
And if I could, Lamar, you're spot on. The specification channel is the absolute best way to get this into the minds of the customer. Architects are usually the customer's biggest advocates throughout the project, and it happens early on. And they're often specifying generators, or they have been anyway. And so more time spent with specifiers, the more likely you are to show up on a project where the customer's already asking for a battery.
Yeah, that you stole my question. That was going to be directly to you, Mark, because you'd mentioned earlier the differentiation between talking to the end user and getting their eyes glazed over versus the responsiveness that you might get from an architect or a developer or a builder. So good point. All right, let's move on. One of the other sales elements or angles of sales, so to speak, is talking about all the sensitive electronics. Joe just kind of touched on how many things in the home are just so dependent on clean power. This is a study we did a few years ago in CE Pro where we asked integrators, which of the following types of equipment that you are installing is severely affected by power outages. And you can see, obviously, the home network being the highest, but all of them being affected on this scale. So when does that conversation come up? And let me turn to you, David, because I know you talk to so many integrators. Is that a important element of the sales presentation? Is that a conversation that happens after you have already talked to them about the projector and the media server and all these great pieces of equipment you're putting in, and then you're going to talk about how sensitive those things are to electronics? Or can you have that conversation before you even start talking about those individual components?
That's a great question. And one of the things that we found is that when you're talking to them and you're looking at the various things that they like in the past that they have in their existing home and what they've worked with in the past, because all of the things that we're doing aren't new like it was in the back in the day. So a lot of times what happens is, well, my wife really doesn't want a lot of that technology because it really doesn't always work right. And it allows you to start drilling down into the little bits of conversation of which is important to your whole process of figuring out what you're going to put inside the client's home, right? So if we find, it's in the past, it was like, well, this particular product as a home automation system doesn't work well because it always fails or what have you. And they all have that friend or their own personal experience that's always sits in the back of their mind. And I think that it's a portion that we have to bring up early enough to have this conversation and be frank enough with them and upfront with our clients to talk about the challenges that are out there right now. Our goal is to provide, out of all the products available, we pick out the products that are going to work the best, provide you with the best possible experience. But we also then understand that this all rests on this foundation, which is the power in your house. And when you're talking to them and you're asking the questions like all of our good integrators do, part of these questions are things that they look at in the background that if we don't address, we may not get that project because they feel we've glossed over it. So I think it's important to bring it up early and to address that elephant that's in the room sometimes. And in some occasions, they may say, well, it's not really a big issue for us, right? But as those systems get larger and we do more with those systems in people's homes with LED lamps and everything else that we're putting in there now, that we should address this and we should make this part of that early conversation. Not to the point where we're taking away from the overall goal of what we're putting in the project, but to set that stage that we need to have this almost like an insurance, right? You have to have this to ensure that it's going to work appropriately for you long term.
Yeah, and it's maybe
I want to add something to
go
that.
ahead.
Sorry, Jason.
Yep.
I'm Captain Talkie today, but
no, that's what I want you to be.
15 years ago, a network was an option. Today, a network is no longer an option. It is part of the system, right? It just so happens that the client gets to use the network to get connected to the internet, but functionally everything that's installed in a house requires a network nowadays. And so just like the network, the power system is foundational. And we're still at a point where a power system is optional, but I think we're quickly approaching a point where it's no longer optional because it protects the equipment to such a point that enough integrators are realizing that it's a requirement to install a foundational and clean power system so that way the rest of the house just does what it's supposed to, just like the network.
Is it a proper analogy to say, the network, the home network is the engine that runs the car, and the clean power is the gasoline that runs the engine? They're really dependent. If you can have one, sure, but you need to have them both to really get maximum performance. So let me stay with you on this, Mark. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, it doesn't matter how great your network is. If there's no electricity, it's off.
Yeah. Let me stay with you on this in terms of, this might be the most important sales tip that comes out of this. And I found this fascinating, is how important is of a trigger word is it when you find out or the customer is planning to have a backup generator for their property?
It's really important because it's doing a couple of things. First, it's letting you know they're already thinking about it. They've had enough experience with power outages that they're considering spending the money and the space for a generator. And so straight away you can say, okay, well, we can help you with that. You may not even need a generator because the Rosewater could in fact provide you with exactly what you're looking for. And then on top of that, if the generator is still in there, which we encourage for much larger systems, the Rosewater will do exactly what it promises to do for the grid. It will also do for the generator. It's going to provide pure, clean power on the output side, regardless of what's coming in on the input side. Because if we're talking about sags and surges from the grid, wait until you see what a generator can do. It's the same story. If you suddenly turn on a toaster a generator isn't going to ramp up fast enough to circumvent the power sag that's going to occur, and then we've got the same issue. So it's the perfect starting point because you're already in that conversation.
Right. So the lesson there also then is that the energy management hub, it's not one or the other. These can be mutually compatible on a property. If the generator, they're going to have a generator, it doesn't mean they don't need an energy management hub and vice versa. And that energy management hub is going to protect them from that initial surge, inrush surge, as you say, when the generator kicks in.
Yeah, most of our projects thus far that we've dealt with also have a generator of some type on site. And I would argue that if there's a generator, there's an even greater need for a Rosewater as a consequence.
Great. All right. Did anybody else have any comment on that? Lamar, is that something that triggers with your customers when there's a generator? Oh,
Lamar
might have lost Lamar again. Boy, he's
Jason, can I chime in for a second?
Yeah, go ahead, Joe.
A couple things. One, when Mark said we're at the early stages, this is where a network was 15 years ago. I could not agree more. It is, we're really at early stages. And when I look at this slide that's up now with the categories you have, think about what those categories are going to look like in another 5 years. There are plumbing fixtures now that have microprocessors in them that are, hand touch. They're touting appliances, refrigerators with small processors in to keep the inventory of what's in your refrigerator. All of these things that are going to be networked and are going to be chip intensive are all going to be affected by power quality. And what I look at is what an opportunity for the system integrator, for our people, because we are really the keeper of the systems. We track every system in a house. I contend that the system integrator, who, when a house is being designed, is always the last person to be talked to, will soon become the first. And the foundation of everything we do is power. And I've said this when we first started Rosewater, at some point in time in the near future, a power quality device will be as common in a household as a dishwasher. That's my prediction.
I believe that as well, Joe. Can you guys hear me on this one?
Yeah, we hear you.
Yeah, sorry about that. I switched over to our Starlink satellite, so hopefully that will give us some breathing room. I did hear your question about getting asked about the generator. Local electrical contractors are pushing that product. It's an easy line item for them because in their world, it solves a lot of problems. It checks off a lot of boxes. So that's why we started the conversation and the education with the builder on the front end, because if we wait until that point, they assume that check mark is already done. And our education with the builder is that it's a complement to our power management solution as a whole. It's not the answer. And those conversations are going to continue to have to happen. And as Joe mentioned, and again, I love what Mark said. 10 years ago, networks were optional. Now they're required. I think we are headed there very, very soon, where power management solutions are the requirement in a home. We do it on a rack level. We do it on a component level as a requirement right now. And every single design that we put out as a company, it starts with a Rosewater. We may have to make it an optional item because it didn't fit within the budget parameters, but it is on the design because we want them to know that we're the professional and we're giving that recommendation. Because if we don't do that on the front end, it's really hard to justify why didn't I bring it up at that time.
Yeah, I'll just throw one other wrinkle into this is think of where we're going to be 5 years from now with electric vehicles. And California has just mandated, I think it's 2030, I think, that they're not going to have anymore. And so everybody's going to have an electric vehicle charging station in their garage or as part of their home. and you're going to want to get up in the morning and go to work or do whatever. And if your power goes out and you don't have the ability to maintain some sort of power for even, minimally generate, your car, which is another strain on the home power grid, on the entire power grid, it's going to be even more of a problem. It makes this even more of a necessity. So,
Jason, it's interesting that, we've, as an industry, we've pioneered so many different categories that are going to the house, right? Networking is just, was just brought up. And if you look at the competitive landscape, you've got Kohler, Generac, Tesla is a good one. These larger companies are getting into this space, and they look at it from a more of a reactive solution. If I've lost power, we can do some battery backup, hopefully. Whereas with Rosewater, we're trying to be much more proactive in that approach to it, where we want to make sure that you have good, clean, consistent power all the time. And by the way, if you lose power, we're going to cover you there as well. But this space is definitely a trending market globally, not just in our industry alone. And we need to look at the outside, because the worst thing we can hear as an industry, and I remember being on the sales floor, the customer saying, if I knew that you offered that, I'd have bought it from you, right? And that's why we need to bring this in, because this is, again, what everything is going to be hanging off of.
Great. All right, let's move on.
Sorry, Jason, real quick.
Ahead.
It's the any of those systems that David just mentioned are fine battery backup solutions. But as far as anybody knows here on this call, as far as I'm aware, Rosewater is the only solution that does it in the way that Rosewater does it. There's zero transfer and there's clean power the whole way through. That's a major distinction, because we all have clients who say, well, I'll just get a power wall. And it's important to understand that they're just different. That's not a competition. There's a completely different product.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. I want to delve into that a little bit later too. So specifically, let's talk about this. Mark, this is really a slide that generated from you're the brainchild here on this. What's your power plan? Tell us about that conversation and how this simple question is something you use with that integrators can use with the customers.
Yeah, and so David and Joe really built it out way farther than I had ever imagined it. My view of it was, presenting a battery solution to a customer, and either they didn't want it because of the price or the space, or they weren't sure about the type. And so my question really was, well, then what is your power plan? Because I'm offering you an option to help, get you what it is that you're looking for. And if you don't want to take that, then what are you going to do? Because I would like to see you have something to protect your equipment, whether it's a rack-mounted power surge, device, or a UPS that sits underneath a desk somewhere. You need to have something. And it was important for me to just get them to understand that they couldn't just walk away from a power plan. They could ignore mine maybe, but they had to think about it. And those conversations often led to them coming back to me and saying, okay, well, it turns out, in fact, that we do want to go with this because it is important. It's more important than we realized.
Yeah. Joe, what have you seen in terms of integrators' ability to be able to use this simple, what is your power plan question with their clients?
When I first heard Mark ask that question, it was one of those moments where you just go, wow, why didn't I think of that? Because everybody in this field has a problem with introduction. A lot of our dealers, when we're out there, and David and I are out there training, well, how do I bring this up? What do I tell clients? That their stuff's going to break? Can't tell them that. That would be terrible. So what we have found is when dealers bring this up and just ask this question, what is your power plan for this project? Do you have a power plan for this project? The customer will at first scratch their head and go, what do you mean a power plan? And then that allows us to have the conversation, and it breaks the ice, and you can have an intelligent conversation about what is going on in the world today and how to maximize the enjoyment of everything you are putting in this house. It's as simple as it is. It's an absolutely brilliant question, because it really does allow comfort in the discussion. And that's what I like about it. And plus, if you When you look at the slide, you'll see we break it up and we tell people, look, there's level 1, which is things you probably won't back up in a power outage because you don't need them to work. And at level 2, where power quality is not as important, bigger motors, but they do have significant draws, you might want to use dedicated batteries or a generator. And then at level 3, you're mission critical, where power quality is really paramount to those things operating as properly. That's when you want real power conditioning and where you want the ability to have those products protected, not only when there's a power outage, but when there's power on, protecting themselves from power. And then with this little chart, you can have that entire discussion. I mean, what we don't have a picture of is on the back of that, you can actually list which components should go on which level. So I find it, and every dealer I've talked to, the minute they see it, go, oh, thank you, because we had no idea how to bring this up.
Yeah, it's brilliant and simple.
Yes.
Yeah. All right, Joe, I want to stay with you on this. Let's kind of turn to some of the misconceptions that we hear out there regarding the capabilities of an energy management hub or any sort of power system. What are some of the things that integrators need to probably proactively address with customers in terms of, what the capability of the battery power is, and those sorts of things? What are some of the common things we hear?
Well, here's a question that everybody on this phone call has heard, all of the panelists. The first thing a client will say when he's heard of battery backups is, I want to back up my entire house. Now you're talking to somebody who has a 15,000 square foot house with 6 air conditioners, but I want to back up my whole house on batteries. And it can be done if you're willing to build another building that'll just house batteries, because people don't understand or have the impression that, yes, one power wall can back up my whole house. That's what I've been told. And so there's this whole misconception of how batteries work and what batteries can actually do. And then, people you have to first bring them to reality, saying, wait, your house draws this much power. If your house draws this much power steady state, this is what batteries can do. And this is how many batteries you'll need. And what's happening in the way early on in many products, there are people out there who are just letting the misconceptions lie and disappointing a lot of customers, which is really difficult. And we're getting through that, but we are, it takes somebody who has the client's trust to explain reality. And that's what makes it so important for our marketplace, because we're finding that the system integrators have the client's trust. They trust us with very expensive home automation, very expensive entertainment systems. They trust our expertise, which is why at Rosewater we focus on this market, because it is the people who own the client, who own the client's trust, that can bring the clients to the realities of, hey, yeah, you could power this whole house with renewable energy, but you're going to need to double your roof size because it's going to take that many panels. The math is the math. There's no magic here. So I think those are the most common misconceptions is, oh yeah, I want to do my whole house. I can do that right away. And, I'm going to run everything on renewables. I'm going off grid. Going off grid really works with a cabin in the woods. It really doesn't work well with a house.
Yeah, that was my other.
The other panelists and see, because I'm sure they have many more misconceptions out there.
There's one really important one that comes up quite often, and it comes up in conversation with engineers and electricians in particular. There's a tremendous difference between a protection rating and a consumption rating. And so think of a 15 amp circuit that's powering or that's connected to a bank of receptacles in your master bedroom. You might have a lamp and you might have your cell phone plugged into it. It's never going to draw 15 amps. You'd have to plug in your vacuum cleaner, your toaster, bring in a hair dryer, really to even come close to operating at that level. So when you're sizing and thinking about whether it's battery or even generator, you don't need to think about the protection rating. You need to think about the consumption rating. And that's where it takes that conversation with the client to understand what those loads are that are important and really understanding what consumption values are. That's going to be able to help you size whatever it is that you're sizing, including solar.
Yeah, and that was one of my other questions. Is I'm assuming there's some misconception as to where this fits into the puzzle with the solar power panels, where people want to, they want to have their meter reverse and go backwards, and is the hub that you're going to enhance their ability to save more energy from their solar panels into their energy management hub and make it so that they could go a longer amount of time running on with that meter running backwards? Or is that a misconception, or is that even play into that alternative energy conversation?
No, it definitely plays into it, and it's only sort of a misconception. There was a time where you could get solar and turn your meter backwards and make money. Today, in most places, there are very few places left where net metering is a reasonable thing to do. So if you're buying electricity at 11 cents a kilowatt hour, which is the national average, roughly speaking, you're only selling it back at 1 or 2 cents a kilowatt hour. So selling back electricity to the utility doesn't make you money. It only offsets your consumption by a small amount. So with a battery and with a Rosewater, in fact, you can consume your solar locally more fruitfully, and then even through the night, in a way that does one even better. You don't spin the meter backwards, you just spin the meter more slowly in the first place by using less from the grid. That's the way that we're sort of kind of picking up from where net metering left off. Let's just not spin the meter at all if we can avoid it.
Great information. All right.
And Jason, I think it's important because it ties into, I want to run my whole house forever on batteries. One of the ways we integrate and use our solar is really to continue to make sure the batteries are topped up, so that in a long-term power outage, because you want to keep our batteries working, even when you have a generator in the background, the solar energy first priority is to top up the batteries for our Rosewater. And batteries are full at feeds load. It never feeds back grid, so you're always consuming your solar at some level, and it allows the runtime of the battery to be much longer. So we've really tried to think it through. And to Mark's point, it used to be you got paid a lot when solar first came out, and there were all the government mandates for it. The one that sticks in my mind is most famous in the city of Toronto in Canada, where they were charging customers 11 cents a kilowatt retail. They were paying for solar 81 cents a kilowatt. Not a very sustainable model because it lasted 2 years, but then every roof in Toronto had a solar panel because you were making a fortune. But that's unsustainable. And today, to Mark's point, you don't get to sell it back at retail anymore. You're selling it at significantly under retail, and so that the math has changed dramatically.
Well, to my earlier point about the trend of electric vehicles, and we know where that's heading. California now mandating all new homes, single family homes, have some solar panels. So it's heightened, I think, the consciousness of customers to think about the power grid and where it's happening and where it's coming from and what they can do about it. So again, it makes another entree conversation for it to be that power plan, so to speak. All right, let's keep moving. We got about 10 minutes left. And I want to talk specifically about partnering with electricians. This is an issue that I know a lot of integrators are facing on the lighting fixture side. How to develop that forge that great relationship with an electrician in terms of the labor, the installation. Do you need an electrical license to install these sorts of things? Lamar, let me ask you this: how have you worked it out with your local electrical trade partners in terms of doing the energy management hub?
So thank you, Jason. The good news in most markets, I imagine they're very similar to our market here in Memphis and in our region, is the players in our home size segment are all pretty predictable, right? So it's not hundreds of electrical contractors, it's a dozen, because they're qualified to work on a 10, 12, 20,000 square foot home, such as we are. So we're really talking to a smaller number of individuals. So don't feel like you have to go out and address this issue with every electrical contractor in the phone book. Identify the architectural firms, obviously the builders, and then the key electrical contractors, and then bring them to lunch. Sit them down, have the conversation with them about what we see as the future, Most of us perceive the electrical contractors as doing the same thing over and over and over. They've been doing it for 70 plus years, and this is the way we're going to do it. So I think that is just because no one's helped educate them. So there's that assumption that no one's telling me anything different. So we're treating them with a level of respect that we want to within our industry, and just giving them the education. And we let them know, hey, this isn't taking anything out of your pocket. This is actually adding to you. I think our electrical contractor charged about $3,800 to do the prep work for the Rosewater bring-in, and there's still a generator on site. So the client, in that respect, paid the electrician twice. So I think just real education and be on the front end. Just introduce them to the product and introduce them to limited number of truck rolls for both sides of the industry.
Yeah, David, to my question earlier, or particular when I jumped to Lamar there, do you have to have an electrical license to be able to install these? We know about over a third of the CE Pro audience have electrical contracting licenses or a master electrician on their staff. Do you need to have that?
Thanks, Jason. You do. We need to have a licensed and permitted electrician on site to make the initial connections into and out of the box. So coming from your master distribution panel and to the panel that we're controlling. Rosewater offers white glove installations, so we provide all the commissioning. Our engineer comes out on site with the delivery. We provide the delivery as well. So we take that heavy lifting off our dealers and our integrators to ensure that that portion's done. But we want to work with that electrician that's on site to make all those connections, to lace the panel appropriately. That high voltage portion has to be done by a licensed electrician. Once our product is installed, and we rarely have that service issue, everything can be serviced by our integrators at that point. But the initial installation does require a permitted electrician.
Great. Let me stay with you. Let's talk about some of the dollars and cents here. Obviously we talked about the timing of when this energy management hub was introduced to the customer. But let's talk a little bit about overcoming the objection of the cost and making them think that this is an expendable, not necessarily something I can afford situation. So specifically, David, what are the costs and what are the effective ways for an integrator to overcome that objection?
So our product is $100,000 plus actual freight. Again, we offer white glove installation and delivery to the project and to the job site for that. Because our product has built-in redundancy to it. We're not monolithic in our approach to it. We have certain costs that are involved in that because we never want the client system to go down. And I think that that's a real important part to bring to our clients' attention, is that in a lot of the products that are out there, if it fails, whatever's connected to it no longer works. Right. And our point is that as long as our system is there, we always want their house to be up and running. And we want, should there be a failure, that's something that we can address and be able to take care of prior to them even knowing about it. We monitor our product by the second, incoming and outgoing. So we know that how the health of our batteries are, what's happening with our inverters, what's happening with all the products. And our dealers and our homeowners have the ability to look into a portal to exactly see what the incoming power is doing, what's been happening to it on a regular basis. So part of that value bringing into it is part of the value that you're bringing of your entire company into their process and into their project. That what we provide to them are all expensive products. These are all wants, not needs. And this is a portion, a lot of times, of the overall cost of the project that we want to use as a protection for that investment long term. And this is not a short-term product, but we find that our life expectancy, and Joe can answer this better, of our product is, in a lot of times, far exceeds their the time that they're going to spend inside their house as for that particular individual.
Jason?
Yep, go for it.
A couple things. One, if you look at the size of our hub, how much it can protect, and you start adding up how many rack level devices that would take, or how many battery backup devices that are available that would take, you would end up at that $100,000 figure and many times exceed it. And people don't look at the perspective of, wait a minute, a Rosewater does, when derated properly, typically a 200 amp panel. We're not talking about a rack level device. We're talking about a device that's taking care of the critical systems of your whole house. So one of the things that also has to be considered is this is not part of the low voltage budget. This is part of the entire home budget, because that's what this is about. And if you look at it from that perspective, yeah, off the top, 100 grand is a lot of money. I don't care who you are. But when you look at what it's doing and what it would cost to accomplish that, the hub is actually quite a bargain. When I talk to electrical designers and people who work in the commercial world who recognize some of the componentry we use, and universally their comments are, we don't know how you get it done at that price. Yeah. They're shocked that we deliver that kind of quality at our price point. The only people who aren't used to it are our industry, and electricians are just not used to products of that quality because they are not in the world of mission critical.
That's right.
And that's the difference. And I think that, when you put it in perspective and put it in perspective for the client, the price point becomes far more justifiable. So that's really the way I look at it. And again, we've had lots of experiences. David and I were on a project recently where the client said, no, I want power conditioning for my entire house. And they clearly knew how much that would cost. And this was a pretty substantial house. And that's, we've had people buy 8 of them for one house because that's what they wanted and they understood it.
That's right.
I think, and I'm going to jump ahead here, Jason, this second part of this slide, how does energy management boost?
Yes.
We've all been in this industry a long time. The custom installers used to start out, it was flat panel that made our business. A flat panel TV when we first started, and I know, Jason, you'll remember this, a Pioneer Elite was a 42-inch screen for $20,000 with not such a good picture. And now for $300 you can get a 50-inch screen with a far better picture. How do you backfill that lost revenue? Because a system integrator has difficulty scaling jobs per year. A system integrator has to be able to scale dollars and products per client, per job. And that is why we have ventured into areas first. That's why, lighting control becomes part of our purview because nobody else could sell it. And it was imperative that we did. And I think that this field, power management and power quality, is the next area for us to broaden the portfolio of what we give to our clients. And, because right now lighting and shades are the darling. I mean, I'm sure your surveys show that all the time. But that fixture that you're selling for $1,200 today, how long is it going to be before it's $400? And how do you backfill the money? And I think
and earlier in the slide, you talked about, 72% of respondents say that energy and power management, power conditioning is a portion of their business. And I think a lot of that is into products like Oversee, where you can remotely reboot things and save yourself that truck roll. And with the Rosewater, our goal is to not have to reboot, right? If I don't have to reboot your processor, then it eliminates inconveniences for your client. And so, we're trying to find little Band-Aids for a lot of the things that we're doing in here. And I think that that's a great product and a great service. But if we can, to Joe's point, we can add to their bottom line with a product that's going to enhance the overall performance of the client's project and not have to reboot things, then it's a win-win for everybody.
Yeah. Hey,
and that
David,
goes back to the proactive versus reactive.
That's right. So to David's comment, it also builds credibility, because it's one thing to say that you're on a service plan, that we're not going to send you an invoice every month for our truck rolls. It's another thing to say that we're going to remotely reboot something but it's a whole different level of comfort for both us as ownership and the technician for their credibility when you don't have to go on site and you don't have to remote reboot. We did a project 18 months ago. It's our single largest project, very, very high, multi-six figures as a total for technology. And 18 months into it, we've done zero service calls for this client. And I shouldn't say that. We did one, and it was a surge event at the outdoor transformer for landscape lighting, where the event was actually at the box itself. So 18 months in, zero truck rolls, zero remote reboots. That's unheard of. So that builds to our credibility, and it builds to the technicians' professionalism, because they don't want to go on the job site because that's their craft. That's what they did. It's their baby. And so every time they can't trace down an electrical issue, as you mentioned, Mark, earlier, the CrestNet issue, we've all experienced those. And there's nothing that I think that makes technicians leave our industry more than just being fed up, right? Over the last decade, we've seen several technicians leave because they don't know how to answer some of the problems that our industry faces. And Rosewater is the first product we've seen that's really addressing that at the core, because we just don't have service issues. You do a beautiful install, you sell them great products, they buy into that recommendation process, and then you wait till the next time they add something.
Yep. All right, we're already a couple minutes over, and I did want to again, this will be part of the presentation. Everybody, this is being recorded, and this will be up on CE Pro in the next 24 hours for people to look. But again, just a quick list here of these are some of the things that happen when you have annoying, problems from a power standpoint that the integrator can avoid by having something in place that's remotely handling it. But we got a couple of good questions, and I want to thank everybody in the audience who's still sticking with us, because we are a few minutes over. But couple of good questions here that I do want to ask. And Joe, let me ask this one to you. This is a good one that came in specifically, that was, what is the lifestyle expectancy of the hub? And then also, is there an issue? I know this is an issue that you hear about, people concerned about the disposal element of the battery if something were to go wrong. Can you address that?
Absolutely. It's one of my favorite questions, because I'm going to break this up into two categories. There are the batteries, and then there are the electronics. The electronics should go a minimum of 20 years. It's just, they are electronics, and they, like all high quality electronics, everybody is projecting 20-year lives, and there's no reason ours shouldn't go at least that long. The batteries, and we specifically choose lead acid instead of lithium. We choose lead acid for a couple of reasons. One, a lead acid battery is 96% recyclable. 96% of a dead lead acid battery goes to make a new lead acid battery. And should you have occasion, which no one on this phone call should except for David and I, to visit a lead acid battery plant, there are semi after semi filled with dead batteries going into that plant, and it's a highly mechanized operation where they pop the top off, they pull all the metals out, smelt them down to the lead, copper, zinc, and they go to make new batteries. They pour the acid out, it goes to a neutralizing pond. That is the only thing that is not used to make a new battery. And then the plastic is ground up and melted and makes new cases. So on this question, it's great because they talked about the disposal fee for lead acid batteries. You get paid for lead acid batteries. You don't have to pay to dispose them. That's why when you go to your local Pep Boys or AutoZone to get a new battery, they are oh so happy to dispose of your lead acid battery at no charge because they get paid for it. So it is very unique that way. I don't think there is another battery chemistry, certainly nothing in the lithium area that you get a rebate for it. People will buy them for you because lithium, for instance, is non-recyclable at this point. There was a recycling plant in North America for a while. Because the process is so difficult, the plant no longer exists. So it is, from our point of view, the choice of lead acid is good because the disadvantage of lead acid is weight. And once our unit is in place, it's not going anywhere. You would never use a lead acid battery in an electric car because it would take all the energy to move the battery. So you wouldn't get the rest of the car to go. How long will it last? Our longest unit in the field is now 7 years, going into its 7th year. We think we had projected the life to be 5 years. And we know now that it is easy to project 7 years because this battery bank is in Boca Raton, Florida. It has been through 2 hurricanes. It has been through numerous power outages, and it's still almost 90% efficient. We project at this point, we're sitting there saying you should be ready at 7 or 8 years. At current metal pricing or lead acid battery pricing to replace the batteries is about $8,000 at a max with freight and everything else. So that's really, it's a terrific question because everybody talks about lithium because you hear about it in cars, and lithium makes perfect sense. It's the lightest metal on the periodic chart. And, it's hard to make a lighter battery than that. But that's what we're looking at. We think the electronics are at least 20 years and the batteries are 7.
Let me ask you one other quick question in 30 seconds. You see these on the news every once in a while about some guys, a specific car electric vehicle charging station in his garage catching fire and burning down the house. What about from a safety standpoint or an overheating standpoint?
Well, lithium batteries the charge control has to be very carefully managed. And in most cases they are. You find if the charge controller goes out of whack, yes, they can overheat. The biggest problem with lithium is for first responders. Because I don't know if you remember from your old high school chemistry classes, but a lot of times for drama, teachers would take a chunk of lithium and drop it in a pail of water. And that starts a chemical reaction that's around 1,000 degrees centigrade, and the water disappears and evaporates. So what happens in many cases is they will begin to internally heat, and then a first responder shows up with water, and it's terrible. Lead acid does not have that problem. Ours are sealed, so they won't outgas, they'll melt. When they do outgas, at that point, it has to be, if there's a fire situation, it doesn't matter because the gas will just burn with it and it's not highly volatile. But in just an overheating situation, it would take close to 140 degrees Fahrenheit before they would begin to do any outgas, and that can be vented. So they're very safe.
All right. I am going to close it off there. We did go over time. And again, I appreciate everybody who stuck with us for the entirety of the webcast. I want to thank David, Joe, Lamar, and Mark for joining me today. I want to thank Rosewater Energy Group for sponsoring. And again, I mentioned it earlier, this webcast recording will be available on cepro.com in the next 24 hours. And I want to thank everybody for attending and have a great afternoon. Thanks, gentlemen.
Thank you, Jason.
Thank you.